Proven out. Welcome, everybody, filtering in.
Hi.
Good evening. So just, I think we'll just give people a moment to settle in, etc., some stragglers and all that.
Yes, of course.
But just to follow up on that and just finish off this thread of conversation before we sort of zoom out. If we get to it later, your relationship to the edit, what was that like?
Well, I was watching cuts of the movie as we were shooting it because we had the editor on set with us, and he was kind of living in the apartment with, Luca had this apartment where he had a bunch of his department heads living with him, and his editor, it was really cool. His editor had a little room there, and he was cutting the movie as we were shooting.
That's awesome.
Luca, not a lot of directors do this, but Luca would invite people over and show them sequences in progress. So I felt very close to it in that way.
Cool.
And then once shooting wrapped, they kind of went away and cleaned up their first assembly without music, without special effects, all of that. And I watched that. Yeah.
Great. All right. I'll be curious about that later. So welcome, those of us joining to the Last Acting Studio Presents Conversations on Craft. Our guest is Justin. Before I dive in, just a couple of housekeeping things so that we're all on the same page. There will be a Q&A portion of the evening. At the end, we just ask that as our conversation goes on, you sort of type that question into I believe there's there's a Q&A button on the Zoom window. Look at that. And then as we transition to the Q&A, our studio manager, Gabby, will nominate some of the questions that have been submitted, and people will get the opportunity to ask. So don't hesitate to send those in as they occur to you. Just so we've all got a sense of timing, we're looking to wrap up at around 7:30 Pacific. So we'll dive right in. You don't think, oh, great, this is going to be a 6-hour exegesis of calendars and some other things. So I'm going to introduce you, which is funny to me. Justin and I are friends, and we'll talk about our history in a moment.
We've known each other a long time.
My guest this evening is a playwright, singer-songwriter, novelist, YouTube celebrity, and now rising star in Hollywood. Screenwriter of the sexy, steamy, sporty, sensual hit Challengers, directed by Luca Guadagnino, starring Zendaya, as well as the writer of the upcoming Queer, directed by the same, starring Daniel Craig, and premiering in 2 weeks at Venice Film Festival, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. He is also a 2-time guest at the McDowell Artist Residency and Workshop, where some magical things have happened. Thornton Wilder wrote Our Town there. James Baldwin worked on Giovanni's Room, and Justin met his wife, fellow rising star, writer-director of Past Lives, Celine Song. Justin, welcome. Thanks for joining.
Thank you so much for having me.
Right on.
Very, very honored to do this with you.
Of course. The opportunity to nerd out with you in semi-public is exciting to me. I do want to we'll start our discussion talking a little bit about sort of what brought you here, damn it. But in the beginning, just to give people a little bit of context. So Justin and I first crossed paths as freshmen at Brown University. I'm going to tell you a story I'm sure you know, because I'm sure I drunkenly told it to you once. I saw Justin in a sketch comedy show in freshman year. And I thought, that is probably the funniest person I will ever know, which was devastating for me to admit, as I was a stand-up comedian in high school. And I, in my head, and to a couple of my hallmates, had nicknamed Justin PBF because I didn't know his name. But PBF was potential best friend, which I did drop when we actually met. And I took a few years to then later tell you, hey, by the way, the people on my hall knew you by a different name. But yeah, we ended up
and it didn't scare me away. Here I am.
Well, I made sure you were in a vulnerable moment as well, and you couldn't just be like, cool, goodbye.
Yeah.
We played around. We were on the same improv team group, etc., for 2 years at Brown, where I got to witness Justin's freakishly funny mind a few times a week, which was lucky for me. And we also, it ended up our junior year, I directed Justin in a play, Closer by Patrick Marber. And then in senior year, I got the chance to play a role in a play that Justin had written, The Sensuality Party, which remains probably the most fun I've ever gotten the chance to have while working on a project.
Oh,
it was,
man.
Something I talk about with my students here is like, the best auditions, the best performances always feel like you got away with something. Not that you hit some check marks or whatever else, but that you were like, I can't believe they let me do that. And that show and that performance was just, with every time, was like, oh man, I get to do this. And so that was a wonderful gift, and I'm so glad that other actors are being able to experience the gift that you have to give them. So that's a little bit of our history. We also, I suppose, like served on the board of a theater together, and
we did
helped build chair platforms, things like that. And so I wondered, I've heard, so that people know as well, there are going to be certain questions that if you want to know, like super basics, like how did Challengers get made or something like that, I'm not sure how much I'll go into it, just because I've heard you answer that question many times. And if people are curious, they can Google like Justin Kuritzkes, how Challengers, etc. So I know a little bit of your kind of early days and what got you into writing, but I wondered, is there any kind of like aha moment that you can point to? So I know you were involved in some of these like student playwriting festivals. In high school at Harvard Westlake. Is there any either performance or experience that made you feel like, oh, this is my thing?
Well, definitely writing my first short play and seeing it put on, I mean, was what was kind of amazing about that experience in high school was that there was this festival that the students would direct each other's work and act in each other's work and then put it on. And then, it was like this big kind of event, and there was a lot of excitement around it because people were excited to see what their peers had written and directed. And, the plays would like run for a week or something, and then that was it. So it really felt like a little festival. And I think it was such the immediacy of theater was really exciting to me, and how little was required to suspend people's disbelief, because these plays were basically put on with no set, and no props. And it was just usually a couple chairs and actors.
Sure.
And that, I found that really kind of like tactile and thrilling in that way. So I think from there I was hooked.
Yeah. We talk a lot at the studio about how, like, for a fair amount of actors, an early experience of being in the creative state on stage, sort of just be like, cool, more of that, please.
Totally.
That kind of sets it. And it sounds like the almost being behind the magic trick of that disbelief and feeling how you were able to take people on a ride became sort of the thing. Is that fair to say? Of like, oh, cool.
No, very much. And it just felt like a way, I mean, even more than like whatever the product was that you were putting up in front of people, I liked living that way with those people. I felt like if my life can be about hanging around with these people and spending time doing this, then that's a great life. Then, to use your words, you've really gotten away with something if you can make that your life. So I think, the really, even before the writing of it was exciting to me, it was the collaboration of it. That was really what made me think, okay, this could be a great way to live.
Yeah, and it is. Did you like are there early, because I wonder if your first interactions with people directing your work to some extent sets a template, or at least sets a like, oh, this is what the writer director relationship could be or ought to be, or were there like faculty modeling that? Like, what was your first experience with, I wrote this thing and now somebody else is going to come in and do some execution of it, right?
Yeah.
Bringing it to life. What do you remember of like that initial?
Uh, that's a great question. Well, I don't know, but I do know that it definitely carried over into the way I approached collaborating in film.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that there was this sort of I'm very used to being in the rehearsal room every day. You know, it felt very natural to me to be on set every day.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think it also felt natural to me to be excited about what somebody else could bring in terms of their point of view on what I'd done. You know, that sort of became uh, ingrained in me really early, that you needed everyone, not just the director, but the actors and the designers and everybody to feel like it was theirs.
Yeah.
You know, because from their perspective, it is. They're not there to do your play. They're there to do their play that
Mm-hmm.
you wrote. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, that
Totally.
there's a sort of, yeah, so that, and to really respect that,
Mm-hmm.
you know. I mean, I think it even had an influence on, if you look at a movie like Challengers, where there's essentially only three characters,
Yeah.
that really came from this responsibility you feel when you work in theater, where you know that if you write a character that only has two lines, somebody's going to have to show up every night to play that guy, you
Yeah.
know? And if
Mm-hmm.
you don't specify that there's going to be whatever, multiple roles played by different actors or something in the script,
Yeah.
if you make it so that no, that has to be just that's what that person does,
Yeah.
uh, they might be happy to have a job,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and maybe they love doing it so much that they don't care and they don't have an ego about it. But it does kind of suck to make somebody show up to do that. So I think that sort of like a play or a film script or something as the first step towards building a community was something that was a lesson I learned really early.
Yeah. That feels like you must also, even just the absence of scars in how you're describing that feels like they must have set a really good culture at your school, such that, because I could just imagine in my
Yeah,
school that like, directors would be fighting with playwrights over what their plays mean, and people would be getting kicked out of the room and like that sort of thing. And it sounds like that was just
that
not.
that
Yeah.
didn't happen. No, that didn't happen a lot to me
Mm.
there. Yeah, most of my scars came later
Beautiful.
in New York theater. That's where I got my scars.
Yeah, but that's, yeah, it's great to not at least have that like instinctive defensiveness that you sometimes come across with writers,
Sure.
that sense of like being additive to the process uh
Right.
sometimes isn't there, and not even explicitly, but you can just sort of sense like you're measuring me against the idea in your head,
Sure.
and I'm never going to be the you know what I mean? And so
Yeah,
that's
totally.
so that's a really lovely and generous way to be like, no, like the premise is that this is incomplete.
Well,
It's not the
yeah.
experience, it's a blueprint and not the fully realized thing.
No, I mean, even if you're directing the thing you wrote, you're not the idea that you're going to have that you don't want to be surprised by anything, or that uh you don't want people, your collaborators, to mine depth within it that you didn't account for or something, is kind of crazy,
Mm-hmm.
you know, uh, especially when it comes to the relationship with actors,
Yeah.
because you're hoping that these people will do it better than you could do it in your head.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
know, that's the
I
whole
would
point.
I would say, otherwise, why would we film
Yeah, exactly, why would we
it?
film it? You could just read it,
Yeah,
you know.
totally. Were you in that process? Were you acting in some of those plays?
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes. Sometimes I was acting in other people's plays
Sure.
when my plays were going on, and sometimes I was
Mhm.
acting in my own plays. Like I think I acted in the play we did together,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
Mhm.
Uh yeah, so there was a lot of that.
Did that feel to you like uh an equally strong calling or something you wanted to learn more about? Like, how were you as you were experimenting with different like places in the theater?
Yeah.
Did it feel like I'm fleshing, because like there's the one version of someone who's like, I'm a writer, but it will help my writing to be an informed whatever. And then there's someone who's like, I like writing, I like acting. Like, let's see how it goes.
I wasn't really thinking about it that way then. I always kind of felt primarily like a writer. Uh that was where I felt most at home
Mhm.
in all of it, and that was where I felt like uh I could do something that was really exciting to me that I didn't think other people could do, not because I could do it better, but just because I could do it in my way.
Mhm.
I knew that there was things I could write that only I could write,
Yeah.
just because that's what it is to be a writer.
Mhm.
Acting, I always kind of felt like someone could probably do this better.
No, but what was that? Is it Vershinin? Who did you play in Three Sisters? Is that
I
his name?
forget. Oh, Kuyigan is the guy's
Oh
name.
yeah. Dude,
Yeah.
that owned. You were
Well,
so good.
thank you. That's very
That-
sweet.
I got to tell you, like as an actor, it was very annoying.
Oh, that's really
I
that
was like,
means a
damn
lot
it! Why
because,
is this? Why is this performance
well,
owned? I
I'm
love
super touched by that.
that.
But no, I was, yeah, as an actor, I always felt like if the role was just right for me, I could do it. But I was never interested in like an actor's life. That just looked so tough.
Mhm.
And uh, I knew I wasn't willing to die for it. And I was for writing, and that was kind of it,
Yeah.
you know. I knew that I was willing to go through the kind of humiliations of being a writer and that the humiliations of being an actor, which are plenty, um, were not they just yeah, I didn't see that as something that was worth it to me.
Did you start improvising in high school?
Yeah.
That to me is so curious. I mean, there are a lot of people who end up being both writers and improvisers, but
Yeah,
it strikes me as surprising just in terms of like polar opposite ends of control.
totally.
You know, did that like feel like it came naturally to you? Was that something that you were like, was any of that sort of uh surprising to you that you would be comfortable doing it? Or were there, I guess, because it just feels to me like what you're saying in terms of like, I'm willing to like, writing is something that I can bake up, create. You
Yeah,
know, if no one else likes this, that's okay because
totally.
I like this. You know what I mean? Like there's a level of confidence and like self-assuredness that is easy for me to imagine having,
Uh-huh.
especially, a writer of your talent. But then to be like improvising and to be like, well, it'll be what it is.
Well, I think I liked it precisely for that reason because it was the opposite of what I spent most of my time doing, you
Gotcha.
know.
Yeah.
But I also think there's a lot of improvisation in writing.
Mm-hmm.
You just do it by yourself, you know.
Yeah.
Um, which is it's different. But often the parts of something that are my favorite parts when I look back at it are the parts that felt like improv in the moment of writing it
Mm-hmm.
because they have that um they're still alive in that way.
Yeah.
You can always kind of feel that
Mm-hmm.
kernel of life in it. Um, even if you've done a lot of work to shape the what's going on around it.
Yeah. Do you
Um,
do you
yeah.
type or record, like if you're down to the level of dialogue
Yeah.
on a project and you are seeking that improvisational feeling, is that something that you can just type at that speed, or do you end up sort of like recording both sides of a conversation?
No, I don't do that, but it's pretty chaotic. It's a lot of it's happening in final draft and it looks like a script as I'm writing it, and a lot of it is happening on Post-it notes or, you know, in my notes app or whatever it is.
Does that mean that you've moved on from the like small brown
I
moleskins?
don't, yeah, I don't have those anymore because they were ruining my pants.
You know, I always had that theory that that's what was going to happen.
Yeah, they were every pair of pants I had was getting ruined by those things. And
Yeah.
it's obnoxious to take out the thing in the middle of a, you know, whatever. You're like, it's kind of remarkable that it's so uh we're so used to people just being on their phones all the time that no one's ever offended if you take out your phone
Yeah.
anywhere,
Uh-huh.
you know. But if you take out a little notebook and start
Right.
writing, people look at you like, is he a restaurant critic or something?
Yeah.
You know?
But you're like, little do you know, I just took out my phone to write down what you just said.
Yeah.
Because that
That
was
was that was literally a thing that would happen. I would take it out in restaurants a lot, my little notebooks, and I
yeah.
would write something that had nothing to do with what was going on. But I could feel the restaurant staff assuming that I was reviewing them. And that,
We're terrible at your job, just didn't know how to keep a low profile.
yeah, right. And like, and also like I was broke, so I wasn't eating at nice places. It's not like I wasn't eating at the kind of places that would have, but still there was a little bit like, you know,
Yeah.
yeah. So anyway, I've moved on.
Yeah, that's great. Um, and when so you then obviously you went to college together, studied playwriting, or at least
Yeah.
you know took some classes. Uh, what were there like early things in your training or education that helped things to click for you, or like are there any things that you remember learning early of like, oh, that's a thing about writing, or that's a tendency that I have?
Um, well, something I learned pretty early was starting a scene as late as possible and ending it as early as possible.
Mm-hmm.
That was something that I learned in theater that definitely I carried with me.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but no, I mean, it was an interesting kind of training, if you want to call it that, because especially the theater department at Brown was very not really explicitly focused or even particularly interested in like what you'd call realism, you
Yeah.
know, or kind of like the, let's say the bread and butter of like American Broadway,
Yeah.
you know, when it comes to plays that are not musicals, like
Mm-hmm.
which are pretty much plays that are on sets that are one location and, you know, or
Yeah.
they're not plays that operate like most films,
Mm-hmm.
basically.
Yeah.
Uh, the education that I got in theater was really towards thinking about a play as like an invitation to imagine the whole theatrical space as something that, you know, was completely free, and
Mm-hmm.
using even the way a play would look on a page, that that could be something that somebody could interpret, that it didn't have to operate as like a blueprint, you
Mm-hmm.
know, it could operate as a sort of a tease or
Yeah.
like as yeah, or as an invitation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that part of it really didn't prepare me for what most of screenwriting is like, because screenwriting is a very uh, there's you can break a lot of rules within it, and there's a lot more freedom than I think most people give themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But a screenplay at least has to look like a screenplay. You
Yeah.
know, it has to sound like a screenplay to
Yeah.
a certain extent,
Mm-hmm.
or else people won't even read it. You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Yeah.
nobody will read a screenplay that doesn't it isn't formatted the way that they're used
Yeah.
to and doesn't say exterior and interior and all of that, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that ends up, the sort of rigidness of that ends up making people kind of write in a very stilted way out of fear of
Yeah.
not doing it right.
Mm-hmm.
But if you uh, but like that is a real restriction that is just not present in playwriting, at
Yeah.
least the kind of playwriting that I came up in, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that was an interesting thing to figure out, and figure out what parts of that much freer playwriting practice I could bring into writing screenplays.
Yeah, I mean, I think Challengers is a great example of that. Having read the script, or at least the Blacklist version of the script, is like, yeah, there's a lot of innovation happening here. There's a lot of trust gained immediately, and to me, that's part of what what motivates that fear is, well, I need to be appearing to write a good screenplay.
Yeah.
And like, I thought you found the balance really well in terms of like, I'm not confused at any point in the reading of this, but I am having a unique experience.
Oh, good.
My eye is being directed in ways that is often not by a film screenplay. And like, it does feel to me like it would be very surprising for someone who does not have a background in plays to like, it's just helpful to be like, oh, I know how to break rules. Like, I've seen people break the rules all the time. Whereas with screenplays, it's just like harder to imagine, like, what would it be to present something unorthodox or whatever else. And what I appreciate about it is I think that, having studied in the same theater department, there would sometimes be plays where honestly you were like, is this an invitation? That's just like a really fucking weird way to like, I'm down.
Yeah.
I always felt, just candidly, like I was being confronted with the limits of my own imagination sometimes.
Oh, interesting.
Because I would read something and be like, I don't understand at all. And like, that it works because like people have put on this play, etc. But I think that there can be kind of like an anti-sense, or a kind of like, let me challenge, like, the part of what I'm doing is making it so that it is hard for you to make sense of like, how does this work? In a way that I think is very exciting for people who are immersed in that world.
Yeah.
But I wonder, like, you're not that you've turned away from theater, obviously, but right now you're not working on plays or whatever. Does that, is there something about screenwriting that feels more appealing to you? And if so, like, what is that right now?
No, I mean, it's just a different, I actually think what excites me about stories or characters or any of that is pretty consistent across plays and novels and screenplays. I think screenplays have a lot of there's an endless amount of experimentation you can do within what feels like the bounds of a screenplay, so no, I mean, I think what's exciting about it to me, coming from theater, or especially coming from novels, honestly, which was what I was doing kind of most immediately right before I started writing screenplays. I had just published a book and I was in the middle of writing another one. And what's great about novels is that when you're done, that's the whole thing, that's it.
Yeah.
And you can give it to somebody and, this is the story. This is the work of art, is this, with a screenplay, it's always two things, it's always something that you hope will be an exciting and meaningful reading experience for somebody. And you really want to make people feel like they've seen the movie when they read the screenplay. You don't want them to feel like it's incomplete. You want them to feel like they watched something when they read it. But you also want it to operate as a practical document that's meant to inform like hundreds of people about how they're going to do their jobs.
Yeah.
And so in that way, it feels like you're building, it's like architectural plans for like a massive skyscraper or something, and then you get to watch that skyscraper get built.
Yeah. By great fucking builders.
if you're lucky, then by great builders. Sometimes you get to watch it built.
Yeah.
by scammers who are gonna it's
actually
gonna
that
collapse.
foundation was there for a reason, turns out.
Right. I haven't had that experience, to be clear, but it does happen.
Yeah. Did you were there things that like in terms of those kinds of details and instructions, for lack of a better word, for technicians and for collaborators, was there stuff that you then had to go back in and be like, actually, I thought I had like given everything that was necessary, but I need to clarify some stuff in terms of objects, timeline, etc.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I mean, especially when you have department heads who are really good at what they do, they ask a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And so like a really concrete example I can think of is that in my very first draft of the script, Patrick's car was supposed to be a Volkswagen Tiguan from 2008. Just because I thought that would be a funny car for him to drive. You know, I see a lot of those around, and it just felt like a funny car for this guy to have.
Yeah.
And then we were in pre-production, and the props guys were like, Tiguan was 2008. It was actually a very rare car. It doesn't that's not if the idea is that he has a crappy car, that was kind of like an expensive, like rare vehicle. So I changed it to a Honda CRV,
Sure.
that is like
Yeah.
missing a wheel and stuff.
Yeah. I love that detail.
So that sort of stuff is happening constantly. And you can also imagine with a movie like this, every movie there's a thing called the props show and tell, which happens midway through pre-production, where the props team basically invites everybody into the production office and they lay out every prop that could potentially be touched by a character in this film. And for this movie, so much of that was tennis equipment.
Yeah.
And there's so much that's revealed about character based on who they're sponsored by, what kind of rackets they use, if they're wearing a mix of different sponsors, whether they're using a racket that's from 10 years ago, but they're using it now, whether they're using all brand new stuff, even on the level of like, they have these, I don't know what they're called, dampeners on the rackets.
Yeah, the rubber. Yeah.
The rubber thing that dampens the shock from the ball hitting it. And our tennis consultant, this guy, Brad Gilbert, said, there's this thing that some guys will do on tour where they'll just take a rubber band and use it instead of a dampener.
Yeah.
And that feels like something Patrick would do.
Yeah.
And immediately that was like, yes, of course. He wouldn't have those dampeners. He would just go to Staples and get, 100 rubber bands and use those.
Yeah.
So there was constantly stuff like that happening, which is part of what's really fun about making movies.
Yeah, that feels like such an exciting day. Like,
it's the best. It's always the best. Yeah.
Cool, man. And so towards the end of college, just to pivot back to our own timeline, you started engaging in the fine art of YouTube. And so if people are unaware, Justin has made and continues to make a series of YouTube videos, character studies, you might call them, using what I believe is the native photo booth app on the Apple computer. I've never just like asked you specifics about how that works, and I'm curious in terms of like, so that people know there's like, there's many facial distortion options when you're in photo booth, because that's what the people were clamoring for, is different ways of emphasizing or enlarging or etc. And I'm honestly just curious, like, for you, is that always like open it up and see what is interesting to me today?
Yeah, for the most part. It's always usually like, it's not very different from a kid playing in a mirror or seeing their reflection distorted in a what do you call it? A faucet, something like that. It's pretty basic.
Has there ever been a time in your life when it became work for a moment?
No. And that was that was a very intentional relationship I had to that. That I didn't want to upload those on any sort of regular schedule.
Yeah.
I never wanted to like do that as a real part of my like creative life. I kind of wanted it to always be something I did exactly when I felt like doing it and never otherwise.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that it was really kind of important to me to keep that corner of my life as something that like had no uh, pressure to be anything other than exactly what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think there's a kind of like uh it's such a great manifestation of that irony of like, or that lesson that we all know if we're interested in like, oh, like maybe I'd like to make something. And it's like, if I'm starting to imagine what making this thing might do for me, then I have sucked the joy completely out of whatever it could be. And of
Yeah.
course, the fact that that is not, was not any part of your calculus is why something can get millions of views.
Well, especially at the time I started making those in college, but they kind of people started watching them really in the first years out of college when I was in New York working mostly, off Broadway as a playwright. And it was this real irony of spending, years or months working on stuff that if everything went great, a couple thousand people would see.
Yeah.
If I was really lucky. Because in theater, even if you have a play off Broadway and it's a hit, maybe like 1,000 people will see it if
Yeah.
it runs for like 4 weeks.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. Like that's like you're over the moon if you sell 1,000 tickets in a 60-seat theater off Broadway. Um, and you get paid like nothing. If it goes well, you get paid nothing if it goes well. And it was kind of amazing to make these things that took me 5 minutes, where I was the studio and the director and the actor and and the network too,
Yeah.
basically. And to just decide when it goes live, and then that was it. There was something really freeing about that.
Did you know, or have you noticed anything in terms of like, when are they more likely, like, are they more likely to come out of you when you feel like between like, I feel stopped up and like I need a pressure release versus I'm feeling in flow and like, sure.
A
Do
little
you know
bit of
what I mean?
both.
Both? Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, a little bit of both. I mean, I haven't made one in a while just because I've been busy, and that's kind of yeah. Um, and they would often come out of working on something and feeling uh like it was really heavy, you know, and wanting to sort of get out of there. Um, but yeah, I've never like made one on demand or something, or I've never made one. No one's ever commissioned one. Like I've never had to make one.
Sure.
Which I think it's a very different experience from being a screenwriter and you get a job and you like, you know, uh, which that's fairly new to me too. But the idea of like you have to deliver something
Yeah.
is something I wanted to protect that YouTube stuff from.
It feels like even protected from like, because sometimes when it comes to our expression, whether it be like any kind of writing that we engage in or any kind of making something, there can be that voice that's like, I should do that because I'll feel better if I've done it.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean? And like even that sort of like means to an end
No,
can be I don't know, maybe it's just my psychology, but like that'll seep in insidiously into even things that I enjoy.
of course.
Right?
Yeah,
Would be like, well, you should do that because you enjoy that thing. And it's like, how have
sure.
I made this homework? How like how have I found myself in this position?
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, yeah.
Cool. Um, so I don't want to yada yada an entire like decade of your life. Are there, so right between graduating and then the process of challengers starting up, um, mm, throughout that time, I'm curious, like, is there, was there a moment that you felt the furthest from something like this being able to happen? Are there like,
Oh, that's funny. Uh, I don't know how to answer that. I mean, I know I'm trying to think. There was a time when I wasn't thinking about movies at all. That's definitely true. You know, there was definitely a time where I really uh making movies or writing movies or any of that was not part of what I was thinking about for my life
Hmm.
until fairly recently, you know. Um, I think I would have been totally happy just being a playwright, at least when I was just starting out.
Hmm.
Um, but in terms of like, no, I mean, you do a lot of the stuff that uh, anybody who's like working a day job and is working as a playwright does. You submit packets to TV shows and stuff. I did a lot of that.
Hmm.
Um, and that never felt great,
Sure. Do
you
they
know.
similarly? I'm assuming you don't get a no, you just don't hear.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. No, you just don't hear.
That's great. That's what I
Yeah.
never. I don't know if like your family experiences that, but like people are always. My extended family would be like, "Oh, acting, like a lot of rejection, huh?" And be like,
Uh-huh.
what I would give to
Yeah,
be
right.
rejected,
Right.
like even just a read receipt.
Yeah, right.
We did in fact watch your
We
audition.
did receive this.
It'd
Yeah.
be like, great, amazing.
Yeah, totally.
The void speaks. Like,
Totally.
that's so nice.
Yeah.
Um, were there moments in that decade where you felt like if this is it, then that would be great. Like I would like to preserve this way of working or this way of living,
I
you
think
know,
you
like
have to. I think you absolutely have to.
mhm,
Um, because at the end of the day, the only thing you have control over is your work.
mhm,
And so if you can create conditions to do your work, whatever the world does with that, um, uh, that's 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 outside of you, you know.
mhm,
So there was definitely, I mean, I think most people who are working in theater in New York definitely have to feel to some extent like uh, if it's just about doing this work and being with these people, then that's a great life, you
mhm,
know. And however I have to figure out a way to make, the practicalities of life possible, fine.
mhm,
Um, but no, I was it 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 doesn't feel uh radically different being at the opening of a movie than it did being at the opening of a play
mhm.
at a 60-seat theater.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah, it legitimately did not.
yeah. I think what's like helpful for me to hear in that is uh that like there can be sometimes that voice that says like you'll never you're not going to reach your aspirations if you're finding contentment, which I think is like I don't think is true or anything, but you can it's sometimes interesting to think like what is the role of ambition and chafing against current circumstance.
Well, it depends what you're ambitious about.
Yeah.
You know, are you ambitious about uh, the rewards, or
Mm-hmm.
are you ambitious about the work?
Yeah.
Because I think I agree that a kind of contentment with where your work
Yeah.
is a kind of death.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
um, unless you do it as a hobby, in which case that's incredible. You know, I think that and I support that. I
Mm-hmm.
think there's like it's one of the most beautiful things about America that there's like community theaters
Mm-hmm.
everywhere,
Yeah.
you know, um, and that like there are people writing poems who work at the post office, and they're not trying to be poets.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are, you know,
Yeah.
but I think that's a beautiful thing and should be encouraged. But if this is what you do, this is, um, then I think, yeah, you probably shouldn't be content about the way you're approaching your work.
Mm-hmm.
But and I think that's a healthy ambition to the extent that it enlivens you,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah,
How do
Sorry, that
you?
was a little that was a little preachy, I guess.
No,
But
please. No, I mean, obviously, like I'm not exactly playing devil's advocate, but I am sort of
yeah.
to give voice to like, you're in a moment and in the beginning of what will be many moments of like achieving what many, living a reality that many people would regard as like that is a dream, right? And so I think to get into the psychology of like, okay, does that mean that this is what you needed? Like, did you get it because you couldn't settle for anything less? Or just sort of thinking about like, how does
Oh,
one arrive there, right? And everything that you've said, I feel like really informs that.
well, also, but yeah, I think uh, luck is severely underplayed.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
yeah, I
How
think
do
luck is which working in theater tells you constantly
you,
because all of my favorite writers are not screenwriters. They're people who, you know, uh, who are working in New York, who if you know who are working in in small theaters for the most part. And if you know them, if you're lucky enough to know their work and get a chance to see their work, then that's,
mm-hmm.
then it'll do a lot for you. Um, but yeah, you don't have any illusions that like the best writers are the ones who
Oh, yeah.
people know.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And that I think is
Yeah,
like, I know I have that experience, and I think we all have that experience about actors that we know,
100%.
um, of
Well,
just like,
I mean, I said this somewhere about Patrick, the character Patrick in the movie in Challengers, that he's ranked 271 in the world.
yeah.
And that like I probably know the 271st most successful playwright in America.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I probably was the 271st most successful playwright in America
Yeah.
at a time, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and I know that's not that far from number one,
Mm-hmm.
but it feels real far from it, you
Yeah.
know.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely know the 271st most successful actor in American theater, you know.
Yeah.
I know a bunch of them, and it's not an easy life, you
Mm-hmm.
know. But it doesn't change the fact that to be there, you have to be so fucking good.
Yeah.
Like, you have to be off the charts good.
Mm-hmm.
And so thinking about that as an athlete, uh, where the ranking actually means something,
Mm-hmm.
was really exciting to me,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
It's sort of, it feels more truthful or something. It feels like a more honest, like you can't narrativize your way around a lost point.
Well, it's a fact in
Yeah.
sports,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
The thing about rankings is that they're always right.
Yeah.
It's just a fact. There's not which is, in the arts, they're not. They don't mean anything,
Yeah.
you know. Uh, I think the highest paid actor in the world is The Rock, you know, which,
Who is a subscriber? No.
yeah, right. Who's fantastic.
Yeah.
And but
Who has
that's,
created something. Whatever he does is, no one could be better at what he's
but
doing.
it's just different. It's not a knock on The Rock. It's just to
Yeah.
say that, like, if you say, you know, Carlos Alcaraz is the number one male tennis player in the world, that's a fact
Yeah.
currently, right?
Mhm.
It's not up for debate.
Yeah.
And that was interesting to me.
And then we get around and we have our little MVP trophies that we hand out among the
Yeah.
industry. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Right.
Cool.
But the Oscar should go to The Rock every year,
Yeah, if
is
we're
what I'm
being
saying.
honest. Yeah. Statham would have
That
a couple. Yeah.
that belongs to Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham. That's all I'm saying. Yeah.
Can you imagine how much heavier it would be if it was him? So I do want to dive in a little bit to the process of challengers. I just had a
Yeah,
few like sort of writing nerdy questions.
sure.
So I'm not going to rehash for right now the idea of like, where the seed of it was planted about watching the match, etc. But I'm curious, like, as you went into it, building character,
Yeah.
Does that feel like something that happens simultaneously? Are there like sessions or days or weeks where you are like, I am going to learn more about this character? Or are you thinking about the triangle and the balance of it? You can also say like, dude, I don't think about it that way at all. I'm just like fucking flowing. But I'm just curious, like, what does it look like to be like, okay, there are going to be some people?
Well, in the context of this movie, I thought about it for a long time before I started writing it.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a lot of who these people were and how they related to each other in my mind
Mm-hmm.
and on paper in different places before I actually started putting them in scenes together.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Again, just in terms of this movie, they all sort of, none of them existed outside of a relationship to the other, you
Yeah.
know, because the idea for the triangle or the idea for the setup of the movie kind of came of a piece,
Right.
you know. So it became a question of seeing this geometry and figuring out, well,
Mm-hmm.
what are the points and where are they in space? You know,
Yeah.
what's the distance between each of these people
Mm-hmm.
and how is that going to change?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I never could see them as I never spent any time with them as separate entities, you know,
Sure.
apart from each other.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then, you know, I don't really do a thing where like I do a draft where I'm doing a pass on one character or something.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you know, uh, just because again, I don't, that's not, uh, they're kind of inseparable, you know, and they also don't exist. They only exist here.
Yeah.
Uh, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're not real.
Yeah.
So they only I can only really think of them in relationship to the thing that's going to happen in the 100 pages of the script.
Yeah.
Uh, because outside of that, they don't they're just like nothing,
Yeah.
you know?
It's a set of dialogue and actions. It's like
Yeah.
will be a person when we choose who that person is.
Well, it is a person when it's there, you
Yeah.
know. But uh, but it's not a person separate from that, you know.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask then? So, there are really fascinating ways in which like the histories and the backgrounds of the characters sort of
Yeah.
relate to each other. And there's an idea that I'm sure you know of in actor training of like the super objective,
Uh-huh.
which could be something like, what is the life the character would like to lead. It could be what is the value that the character places above all else. What is the thing they'd most like to achieve. Sometimes I think of it as like, how does this person think the world should work?
Hmm.
You know, does it feel like in the process are you traveling up to that level of like these are competing philosophies about what it is to like support someone, what it is to express love to someone? Like, does it feel like that's coming out incidentally as you are just tuning into conversation? Or are you ever sort of zooming out to be like, okay, I have these sort of in focus ideas of opposition. Let me further define those and crystallize them and then see how that plays out. Does that make sense as a question?
It does. You're doing that the whole time. I mean, they don't uh a character's philosophy isn't incidental to the way they behave
Mm-hmm.
in action. That's
Right.
who they are, you know. Um, and this movie is, you know, the movie we're talking about, that most of the movies I've written are primarily the drama is coming out of conflicting philosophies.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Mostly because I find that an interesting thing to watch. You
Yeah.
know, that's kind of what, and it's an interesting thing to watch somebody play.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so yeah, no, it's not like I guess all I'm saying is I don't think of any of these things as happening on separate planes of existence or something.
Sure.
Just like when you meet somebody in real life or when you're talking with your friend, you don't sort of categorize the different parts of them. You meet them as a whole.
Mhm.
you know, and everything is bleeding into each other.
Yeah.
Um, so, you know, like when you watch a politician on TV and you're like, I don't like that guy.
Mhm.
Um, it's it's never like I don't like the way he talks and I don't like what he stands for
Yeah.
and I don't like what he's trying to do, you
Mhm.
know. It's always
Getting.
all of them at once.
Yeah.
It's always like I don't like the whole thing,
Yeah.
you
But does
know.
that feel, yeah, do you like, as you've worked on other things, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not like standing up for this point of view, but I'm curious about, like, let's say you're working on a different project
Yeah.
and you're having these two characters are hashing it out and you're like, I actually don't know enough, like they're sounding the same. I don't know enough about what differentiates them. Like, I'm not actually hearing it. I'm forcing this. Is there, like, have you ever been in the position to have to take a step back and be like, well, what is this character? What do they represent? And what am I missing about who they are, even in their history?
Sometimes. And sometimes the much more pleasurable thing or like exciting thing when you're writing is when you don't know where the story is going to go and who the person is tells you,
Yeah.
you know. That's really fun. That's
Mhm.
when writing feels uh uh you're really alive doing it, you know, is when you have written the characters like into a corner plot
Yeah.
wise, and which happened a lot in Challengers because the whole movie is corners, you know. And then going, well, the answer to where we go is going to come out of who this person is,
Mhm.
you know. It's going to come out of like it's sort of the same way I think about tone sometimes. Like I never think about uh trying to make a scene funny or something, or trying to make a scene feel a certain way. It's always more about trying to make somebody feel like, well, of course Tashi would say something like that,
Mhm.
you know. Of course Patrick would respond that way.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that especially in a movie like this, I didn't really get much into situations where the characters were starting to sound like each other
Yeah. No,
because
no.
the whole movie is about how they're
Yeah.
different energies, you know.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I've
Just
had that on stuff where it's like an ensemble thing,
sure. Yeah.
you know, and there's like a lot of people on screen at once,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
especially if it's like an actiony thing and you've got like, you know, like the way somebody says grenade is like not that like, you know,
Like, damn it, he would never.
yeah, right. Like there's only so many ways to say like get down,
I've
you
totally
know.
betrayed him. Um,
Yeah,
so
but yeah.
let me know if I'm wrong, but it sounds from what you're saying, like, is a lot of that discovery happening through the investigation of dialogue?
Uh, it can. It can. Um, but I mean, you know, a sort of interesting thing about a screenplay is that it's like you're trying to make everything happen in as little space as you can, always.
Yeah.
Um, so dialogue can be a great way to figure out something,
Mhm.
but it's very rarely the most efficient way
Yeah.
to work out an idea,
Mhm.
you know. Um, so the kind of the scenes that are easiest to write are the ones where I already know a lot about what everybody's coming into it with,
Yeah.
you know, so that I can from the start be making it efficient
Mhm.
and making it having people get to the point,
Sure.
you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
So that's setting up a lot of what you know to be true before anyone has opened their mouth. And then
yeah,
they start to, battle, fight for what they need, etc. But
yeah,
it feels the most fun when you already kind of have a good sense of what what's going on here and then discover the particulars rather than going to
yes,
the particular and then being like, is that what you want? Or
yeah,
is that
exactly.
right? It's like more tactical that you're learning.
Yeah. Well, because
Sure.
it also then ends up usually producing a more interesting thing for a person to say,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, because by the time they open their mouths, the audience already knows so much about
Yeah.
what's happening,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
I think that, something that I'm sure I'll always be wrestling with, but I talk sometimes with the students at the studio about how, like, we're just biased sometimes as actors to
Uh-huh.
believe that the dialogue is the scene.
Right.
It's the thing you have to memorize. It's like the thing that your eye is drawn to. And I read this quotation recently, right? It's a Hitchcock quotation, which is like, first we write the screenplay, then we add the dialogue.
Uh-huh.
And like, even just thinking about a screenplay on that level of like, oh yeah, it exists. Like, the scene is not the words that are exchanged. They are a component of the scene for sure.
They're one piece.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's like it's also it's like 10% of your job as a screenwriter
Yeah.
is writing dialogue,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
Uh yeah. It's really like it's actually such a small part of the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Even in a dialogue heavy movie.
Yeah.
Uh it's like which is not to say it's an unimportant part, it's a really important part.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it can be like the one of the main ways that a story is happening is the way that people are talking to each other. Uh, but but even in a really talky movie, it's like the arrangement of the scenes is more important.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
what's happening when
Mm-hmm.
in what sequence is more important than what people are saying.
Otherwise, it doesn't really mean anything. It's like, all right.
Yeah, right,
Um,
exactly.
can I ask then? Because you told this story at an interview that I was able to see about. There's a scene in Challengers that happens down by the beach.
Yeah.
Sure, by the water. Uh, and you told the story of how y'all were losing daylight or losing night, one of those.
We were losing night. Yeah.
Yeah, and needed to make some immediate rewrites.
Yeah.
Needed to sort of like pare down that script because we weren't going to be able to shoot it all. Um, how did you go about, like, is there a hierarchy in your mind of a sort of like, okay, this is the non-negotiable, this is what I would like, etc., or is it like, okay, the most important exchange is this, and so let me see what we need besides this moment or half a moment? Like, I just imagine being so overwhelmed in that moment of like, holy shit,
I was, yeah.
I polished this thing, I was ready for it to be done this way, and now you're telling me some of that is actually unnecessary because it has to be, because
Yeah.
that's the situation. And so, like, what do you think? Because to me, that's like a beautiful, like, no, what is the essence of the thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's the kind of contradiction is that you both need to, and that was a very rare particular circumstance where, we had this location we couldn't get this location again because it was like somebody's house, you know. And it was we were supposed to get to this scene earlier in the day and we didn't, and then now we had 2 hours to shoot a night scene and it was like 4 a.m., or 3 a.m. or something, and the light was going to come up. Um, and it's an important scene. Um, and so I had to kind of figure out really quickly what are the things we can't lose,
Mm-hmm.
and what are the parts of this that if we lose, it won't feel like life. It'll feel like screenwriting,
Mm-hmm.
or it'll feel like you know, uh, like uh, like you're being told
Yeah.
information, you
Yeah.
know. But at the same time, it needed to feel like it was not a compromise, like this was always what it was supposed to be,
Mm-hmm.
you know. Because if it doesn't feel like that, then it can't go in the movie.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, that was the challenge. Um, it was honestly, it was very, uh, uh, I felt so stressed.
Sure.
I felt very alive. Um, I think I had 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And I had to cut the scene in half.
Yeah.
And but then it became this like amazing thing where I had, I always would have my laptop on set for instances like this if they ever came up.
Mhm.
And I had my laptop open. I was doing it. We had like 3 minutes to go before while they were setting up the camera. And the actors knew what was going on. And they came over and were huddled around my laptop and, were like reading the scene off of my laptop. And somebody would go, I missed that line. And I would go, okay, fine, I'll figure out a way to put that back in. I'll have this. And then, we were doing that. And then we were like, do we have time to go to base camp and have the AD print new sides for you guys to memorize? And we realized we didn't. So we just had the actors memorizing their new scene around my computer, you know.
Mhm.
And now I cherish that memory very much. It's kind of a beautiful, like, what an incredible thing.
Yeah. And that does feel
Um,
like such a theater.
totally theater.
It's
Yeah.
just a bunch of people like, all right, how can we play make believe better? They told us we can't have that prop. All right.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
figure it out.
Yeah.
Uh, last question about that, and then I want to open up to the Q&A is I'm just curious, like, what your relationship was to, because coming from the theater,
Yeah.
right? You, oh, this is beautiful. We've cast this part. Look at this actor. They are this part for now, right? But like the thing will continue to exist
Yeah.
after this production. And so, like, in what you're describing, it's like it feels at least like there's a necessary handing over of the character to perhaps an even greater degree to the actor, because you're like, it what I dreamt of it or what I was hoping to get out of it is like, well, you're the only, like, it's just going to be you. This
Yeah.
doesn't exist for anyone. Like, they're not going to see it as like his version of this thing or whatever. And so, did it feel like there was more like dialogue or more need to be like, okay, like, let's suit it to you? If there's something about what's true about you, either energetically or how things come out of your mouth, like, did it feel different, or is that just great casting where it didn't have to?
Yes and no. I mean, I think you cast people who are as close to the character as you can, you know. The reason you cast somebody in the first place is because you think they can do what's there.
Yeah.
Um, because, uh, yeah, I mean, unless you're writing something and you already know who it's for,
Mhm.
which is its own thing, like if an actor is a producer on something and they've hired you to, or they've like talked with you about this role and then you write it for them,
Mhm.
that you can kind of shape it for them in that sense. But in this case, this was something I wrote on spec that I'm just trying to write characters that feel like they exist, that feel like people.
Yeah.
And so when you're casting, you try to cast people who uh, it's not so much of a leap, you know. But then, of course, because that is the only person who's ever going to be this character. Um, if something isn't, if either something is like literally contradictory to who they are, like if you write they have red hair and then they don't, or something, you adjust that in your mind, or you give them a wig, But uh, uh, and it's pretty easy to figure out what of those things are essential to who the character is and what of those things are cosmetic.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, we were talking about this a little bit earlier that there was coming from theater, there was a sense every day on set that I would feel that I took me a while to figure out what it was, and it was grief. And that the grief was about realizing that that's the only time we're ever going to do that scene,
Yeah.
and that it wasn't a grief that was about the scene not going well. It was actually worse when it went well, because then you really know you're not going to shoot it again. You're not doing reshoots, that we got it.
Yeah.
And in theater, there's always the promise, not just of the next night, but the next production,
Yeah.
you know.
Mhm.
at the same time, I think a theater actor, yeah, they may be the person who's doing it for now, but if it's going well, they're going to do it 100 times.
Yeah.
And that's a different relationship with a character than I think most people in film get to have. You know, most people in film have to live with their performance of it forever,
Yeah.
you know, and a theater actor gets to live with it for months and then it's like it never happened,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
uh, which is, I think, an incredible, and in that sense, in theater, like, yeah, it always defaults to the playwright a little bit. Like the ownership of the character
Yeah.
always gets returned to the playwright at the end of a process. But I think if you're doing something 100 times, that actor has every right
Yeah.
to feel some ownership over that character, you know. Um, yeah.
And would you like to take this opportunity to announce challengers too, or should we?
Yeah, it's
Are you gonna do it like Linklater style? It'll just be like over 40
it's
years.
happening. Yeah, you'll see it in 20 years from now. It'll
Yeah,
be
joints
yeah.
breaking down,
Yeah, exactly.
all that of like
Exactly. They're on
actually.
the senior tour.
It'll be beautiful.
Yeah.
Very cool. So I want to open things up to some of our questions. Before I forget, just a little bit of housekeeping. As you know, this conversation is hosted by The Last Acting Studio, where founded by Deshaun Terry, where I and some other amazing artists teach. And there's an audit. If you're interested in seeing what classes like there's an audit tomorrow, and there's an audit, I believe, next Saturday, something like that. Gabby, the studio manager, will drop the link to the studio in the chat so that you can see if, you know, getting a good vibe or whatever else. Gabby, have you nominated any questions for us?
Yes. First of all, I'd like to correct audit this Saturday and then the following Thursday.
Great. Got my shit together as usual. So there's an audit this Saturday, not tomorrow. Don't show up tomorrow. No one will be there. But this coming Saturday and then next Thursday. Party on. Good opportunities. Yeah, so what do we got?
Elijah.
And I believe what we're going to do here is, if your question is chosen, you will be. Hey,
Sure.
Hey,
Hey,
how's it
Elijah.
going?
Good to see you.
Hi,
Dude.
it's nice to see you too.
Wow.
It's nice to meet you, Justin. I mean, this has been so informative and incredible. So thank you for sharing, especially about your journey and like the work aspect of it. I wanted to hear a little bit more about the process of Challengers going from a script to being a film. So like what was or who was the green light that kind of made that happen? And then something you said earlier about writing, I'd love to dig into a little bit about getting into a scene as late as possible and leaving as early as possible. So
Sure.
Cool.
Thanks for that question.
yeah,
The process of how Challengers came together is pretty simple. I just wrote it around the end of 2021 as a spec script, you know, which I'm sure everybody on here probably knows what that means, but in case anybody doesn't, it just means that nobody has hired you to write it. Nobody's attached to it. You're just writing it for you, speculatively, you know, and you're hoping that something will happen with it. So I wrote it just for me. And then I sent it to a bunch of producers, and met with a few of them, you know, and that was happening through my agent. And I met with a bunch of producers and ended up deciding to work with Amy Pascal and Rachel O'Connor at Pascal Pictures. And one of the first conversations we had about it was that they wanted to send it to Zendaya, who was somebody who I had thought about, you know, after I had written the character because of obvious reasons. You know, she felt like somebody who could, one of the few people alive who could even think about doing that role, you know. But Amy and Rachel had a relationship with her from the Spider-Man movies. So they, you know, were good friends and collaborators, and they just sent it to her and she read it and wanted to do it. And so that was kind of when it started becoming real. And then, you know, Luca was somebody we had been talking about from the very beginning as a dream director for this. And once we had Zendaya on board, we sent it to him and he read it and we met and then he wanted to do it. And that was is a pretty abnormal in terms of how quick it happened. Because I think the space between when I wrote the first draft of the movie and when we were in pre-production was like 5 months, which is insane, you know.
Yeah, that's so fast.
It was very fast. But part of the reason for that is that Zendaya needed to shoot Dune Part 2 in June. And so we needed to make this movie before that. So we were, in a way, like her schedule, the window that she was available for, she knew she wanted to do it and to produce it. And we knew Luca could do it in that window. And, that's what made it all happen so fast. So that was kind of it. And then, then we were in pre-production. There was no real development process or something, which is kind of a blessing, honestly. Because immediately we were in the trenches with each other, because we were talking about the movie as something we were actually going to do, and in a very like immediate practical sense. Does that answer that part of it?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's incredible. I mean, it's also a huge testament to her as an actress to film that movie in between like whatever she was doing in Dune Part 2, like huge projects.
She's the hardest working person in the bit. She really is a complete crazy person when it comes to work. But yeah.
I loved hearing about the scene by the water as well, because I would have never known that was cut in half, because it feels
good,
so intentional. I mean, the whole thing is very symbolic, and I love that you talked about like film. Well, a script is not the finished product, and like there's more being brought to it, both by the actor's performance and the edit and the direction. But like that scene in particular was like, to me, that was the core of the film. It was setting everything up, including setting her up symbolically as like this siren character. She sits by the rock by the ocean. Incredible. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
So real quick, Justin, just in terms of getting into a scene late and getting out early, you could share in terms of.
No, I mean that's a little bit like of a generalization, but I think what I mean is that a movie more than a book, let's say, which is another, which is kind of one of the worlds I was coming from. There's just a constant battle against real estate in terms of like time and people's attention. And so you're trying to make a lot happen in a short amount of time. And so because of that, you just don't have the space to luxuriate. And if you are, even in a movie, and I think that can be misinterpreted, because you might think I'm saying that every movie needs to be like really balls to the wall, like 4 on the floor action. And I really don't mean that at all. I think I mean even in a movie that seems to be luxuriating, things need to be happening. Because any moment in a movie where something isn't happening dramatically is like dead in a way that feels deader than in any other art form.
Yeah, because the standard is so high of like, no, turning.
Yeah, exactly.
It's part of what is famous about The Room is everyone says hi to each other.
Yeah, right.
We're good.
Right. Yeah, like we get it.
Yeah. Cool. Gabby, who's next?
Excited?
Zaire. Hey.
Zaire. Hey.
Hey, Zaire.
Hi, guys. Can you see me?
I can see you, yeah.
Oh, okay. I don't know. I'm on my phone. Nice to meet you, Justin. Hi, Patrick.
Hi.
I wanted to ask, it doesn't have to be about challengers, but if there's ever been a time where you've gotten like a studio note from, or like feedback that you didn't agree with from a studio or executives, I just kind of want to know how you've handled that, if that has ever happened to you.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, one of the nice things about challengers was, again, because of the sort of pushed up timeline that we had, there wasn't a lot of time for the studio to try to shape the thing. You know, we were kind of like, and because I had written it on spec and everybody was signing on to that, we could kind of go to them and say, here's the movie, you know, when we were selling the movie, we could go, here's the thing we're making. Are you on board or not? You know, which is a very different process from if a studio hires you to write something. Or if you're, you know, I don't know, I haven't done this, but like getting on a franchise or something where there's a lot of people who are already there, who predate you. It's just a naturally different situation. My sort of, something I was thinking about a lot when I would get notes from the studio or from anybody was that a good note is annoying because you have to find a way to do it. And a bad note is stressful because you have to find a way to not do it. And
sure,
I think that's kind of, so you can generally negotiate within yourself and you can generally tell by your own reaction whether you're annoyed or stressed out. Because anytime I'm annoyed, I know that that person's got a point, you know, and now my job is going to become, how do I figure out how to make that work within the thing I'm doing, you know? How do I make that mine? How do I make that feel like it's organic to this movie? But a stressful note is stressful because now all of a sudden you're engaged in lying. You know?
Sure.
And that's a terrible feeling. That's a worse feeling. It's much worse to get a bad note because you have to trick people.
Just making them feel heard.
Making them feel heard. Making them feel heard. Which is easy or hard depending on the person and depending on the scale of the note, you know.
Cool. Great. Gabby? I feel like
you can see who the person, I think it's is it
it was just written.
Emily?
So I will ask the question.
Oh, I see.
Or no?
Oh no, there's somebody there.
Is this your question?
Yes, hi. I didn't even know I was supposed to come on. That was
No, please.
You don't have to. We can just read your question.
too late now.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hey.
My question was just about, you know, as a writer, you have to advocate to a certain level your vision and your script. And I hear a lot of horror stories about writers getting cut out of processes and not even getting to go on set and being a bad movie or, you know, not your movie. And so I'm wondering what your experience has been like advocating for yourself, or if it's just been a dream, which it sounds like it has, specifically on challengers, then I'd like to hear about that too.
Well, you're lucky if you're even put in a position to advocate for yourself. You know, I think one of the really amazing gifts of this process for challengers specifically, and for queer, because it was also Luca, was that Luca like insisted that I be on set, and in pre-production and in rehearsal the whole time. And he kind of insisted that if there was going to ever be anything that changed in the script, it was going to be me who was doing it, because that was important to him. And I think part of that is about him and the kind of process he likes to have, and part of that is about the benefit of writing something on spec, because by the time you're bringing other people into it, you're bringing them into something that already exists, you know, and that gives you a certain amount of it's not even just about like leverage or something, because it's really not that, because people can always find ways to push you out of something. It's more that it gives you authority. And what I mean by that is not like contractual authority. It gives you real authority, because you've created something, you know, that people are going to live inside of. And so even if they have ideas about how that thing may morph or expand or contract or whatever it is, they have to show up to the house you built, you know. And usually if they're smart and if they don't have if they're smart enough and generous enough and confident enough as a collaborator as Luca was to not be territorial about that, he understands that if there's a leak in the house, the guy who's probably best suited to fix it is the guy who built it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that doesn't make it any less his house.
Yeah.
To have me there. So I was, the short answer is that I was just insanely lucky to, have my first movie be made by a person who wanted to have that kind of a relationship with his writer. And that's also a real testament to the producers too, to Zendaya and to Amy and Rachel, who pretty much insisted that I be there.
And to the script.
Sorry?
I said, and to the script. It's a credit to the script.
Well, but that's part of what I'm saying in terms of like your work will be its own argument for keeping you around.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Because that's, yeah. If they like that, then there's more where that came from.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Right on. Cool. Evelyn, did you have a question? And we are running up against time, so we'll just try to be as concise as possible. Let's see. I just so that tech delays don't end up getting in our way. One thing that Evelyn was wondering about is what surprised you most when watching the script come alive?
Well, what surprised me most, honestly, about making movies, because this was my first time like working on a film set. I had maybe like visited a film set once or twice, but this was my first time really spending any extended time on a film set. And it's really just how long everything takes. Everything takes forever. Changing the setup takes forever.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not, and we had the best in the world, like we had the best people.
Yeah.
But it still takes forever. And I think that was surprising to me, just how much like time you're bleeding every day on a film set.
Mm-hmm. Did you feel like you had to get better at like conserving energy because of the nature of the thing?
Well, it definitely made me really appreciate what actors have to do to conserve energy in between takes, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And figuring out, a lot of time when you're on set, like and if you're the writer on set and you don't have something immediate to do, a lot of times you're like taking care of other people on set. You're just like another person on set.
Sure.
Who's trying to be there to give people anything they, to help in any way you can. So yeah, I found myself like being a sounding board for Luca a lot of the time, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. I think we got just two more and then we'll call it an evening. Is that all right, Justin?
It's fine with me. Yeah, no, whatever.
So
I'm happy to, whatever you guys want to do.
We're just Kyle was wondering in terms of what are some ways that you stretched the format of the script? There you have our standardized script format and all those expectations. What are some ways that you stretched beyond that or like to stretch beyond that in your work?
Well, okay, I'll think about like something that I actually found really useful when I was writing Challengers specifically was that I was reading a lot of manga at the time, and I was thinking about like ways that manga would and just comic books in general would sort of visualize action, where there's like a lot of onomatopoeia in a comic book. And I think a screenplay has a lot more to do with the way that a comic book feels than the way that a novel feels, So I think the most recurrent example of that in the Challenger script is thwack, which is something that every time I realized pretty early on that tennis courts were going to be a sort of they were going to be teleporters, that the way that we were going to go from time periods to time period was going to be from one tennis court to another.
Yeah.
Because the whole movie is that, you know, when you're playing a match, you're playing every match you've ever played.
Mhm.
And so, and every tennis court is the same, basically.
Mhm.
And in this movie too, there's only hard courts. There's no grass, there's no clay. So
Yeah.
every court it's the same surface, you know. And I kind of figured out that you could that was going to be part of the way that the movie moved through time, was through the movement of a ball.
Sure.
And so I started, instead of writing cut to, I would just write thwack.
Yeah.
Because the scene would literally cut on the crack of a racket and then continue with the ball traveling in another court.
Mhm.
And that's not like a particularly radical thing to do in a screenplay, but it was helpful to me as a sort of like drumbeat, you know,
Yeah.
which I think is just part of every time I try every time I'm writing a screenplay to have each screenplay have its own language, you know, its own vocabulary, and that each one is teaching the reader how to read it.
Mhm.
And so that's a really, when you land on something like that, even if it's something kind of small, that really opened up the movie for me when
Yeah.
I was writing it. That like you could track the movement of the movie through the thwacks, you know.
Totally. So to
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah.
And then there's also the first page is sort of like the first page of some plays
Sure. Yeah.
where you just introduce the characters. You just name
Yeah.
characters and who they are, which I found very refreshing because I feel like some often people write screenplays and they're like, we must slowly parcel out information. And you're like, cool, I'm not reading this twice. So can you just tell me like who the hell that is?
Well, that can work for
Yeah.
a different, you know, like I was uh for various reasons, out of curiosity, last night I had never read the script of The Matrix and I found it
Dude,
online.
I
Yeah.
was reading the script of The Matrix
Last night?
2 nights ago.
Why? Why were you reading?
Because I wanted to know if he finds out that he's not the one at the midpoint. I just wanted to confirm for myself. And I was like, because I was reading some things about midpoint. And I was like, yeah. Anyway, this is very fun.
Well, but so the way that script starts is the opposite of the way Challengers starts, you know, but it makes perfect sense for that movie. Challengers, I knew it was going to start that way because I was, again, the way the movie came to me was these three bodies on the tennis court, you know, and that it was like the still image. And the movie was going to be about figuring out how these people got into this arrangement, you know, which is a thing that a few movies do, you know, there's like, but I always have found that a really exciting way to launch into a story. Where the whole movie is about figuring out how we got here.
Yeah, it's also helps, I think, that there's three characters. I think, if I'm not misremembering, in Iceman Cometh, there's that, and it's like 12 people. You're like, and you're like, I'll take your word for it, man. Can we start?
Yeah. Totally.
Like, just give me the experience.
Right.
Sorry, Janice, we just had space for one more. So Lauren's question, what did you know now that you wish you had known when you were starting out?
Starting out in screenplays or starting out just
I assume we mean like in utero. No. Probably, let's say, beginning the process of writing professionally.
So much stuff. So much stuff. I mean, you know, I think I'll just pull the first thing that sort of comes to mind, which is that, I'll just pull that sucker right out. I think I would have liked to know that the process itself never gets any easier. And it never feels better. Like and what I mean by easier is that you never feel more, it never feels easy. It never feels like you're on top of it, you know, or like you can just kind of do it like casually or something.
Sure.
I think, but the part of it that does get easier is that you can remember that it was hard on the last one. You remember that you felt exactly this way you feel right now on the last one. And you don't remember how you got out of it, but you know that you did. You have proof that you did. And knowing that, or just having that proof, gives you courage. And that courage is all you need to get out of the thing that's difficult. But that courage, you don't need the proof to have the courage. The proof just makes the courage easier.
Yeah.
So I wish I had known when I was starting that the courage was available to me. It just wasn't backed up by proof, you know? And yeah, now the part of it that really is easier now is that when I feel stuck, or when I'm in a place where something is taking a long time or it's difficult to figure out, it's not as if I'm better at figuring it out. I'm just a little less despairing than I once was. Yeah.
And honestly, I think that's sort of the, it's really beautiful way to put it. And like a little less despairing is like, because it costs something, like it's not gonna not be confronting your identity and your like, what am I doing and how am I spending my, like that's what it is for it to not be casual, is like, yeah, it doesn't feel okay when it's not going well.
Yeah.
But it's felt not okay before, and here we are,
Exactly.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much, Justin. Thanks for giving us a bit more of your time. Very much appreciated. Let me see if there are any things that I need to announce, etc. No, just people expressing appreciation. And thank you so much for sharing your experience. You are, as always, an inspiration to me. Before all
and very much likewise.
Very much likewise. That just makes sense. But no, thank you so much for doing it. Thanks everybody for joining. Hope you learned as much as I did, and I cannot wait, man. For we got Queer coming out soon. Well, I'm not going to actually be in Venice. It's not currently in my plans. But we got Queer coming out soon, and we will all have to keep our eyes peeled, because I just can't wait to see what else is in store for you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it. Right on.
A real pleasure. Peace.
Have fun out there.
Thank you.